Hey, what's up, guys? Metal571 here, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the creative Aurvana Live. This is the first edition of the headphone, which is the classically known as the better one. Disclaimer, I have not heard the second one, and I've also bought this with my own money. No one is paying me to say anything in this review. So what is this? This is a consumer grade over-ear biocellulose dynamic, or just biodynamic, or whatever you want to call it, headphone. And it's also supposed to be designed as a portable headphone. But we'll talk about that in terms of isolation in a little bit in the review. So you should know that this is a Foster 443741. That's the OEM of the headphone. And actually, Denon also produced a headphone with the same OEM. Didn't quite sound the same. Tile talked about this on Inner Fidelity quite a while ago. The Denon D1001 actually is the Foster variant equivalent from Denon's old line. I don't think they make it anymore now. But this is the same. Foster is the parent company of Fostex. It might be the same company. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the comments. And that's the same company that does the THX00 that I loved so much. The ebony version I already reviewed. The mahogany sounds somewhat similar. That's a great headphone. And so they clearly have something, there with their biocellulose driver technology. And so this is kind of a distillation of that to a lower price point. And it's pretty good. All right, so that's the purpose. Now let's talk about the build quality and accessories and comfort, as we usually do. So there's a lot of plastic going on here. You got this glossy plastic on the sides. The headband, however, is metal, so actually it's really not too bad. I believe the MSRP on this is usually $99, but as of this review, we're looking at about $60 as the street price on Amazon for these, which is, that's a steal. I'll talk about why in a minute here when we get into the sound. But as I was saying, the plastic, glossy plastic, this, if you don't like fingerprints, you're going to hate this this material here. And at least you got matte on the headband. It says Aurvana Live on this side, on the right side, and again on the left side. L&R are on the outside. I actually prefer them to be inside the ear cups. AKG does that with the K553. But anyway, so there's a lot of plastic here, but the headband, the internal part of the headband is still metal, which is good. Metal. And the headband is, even though it's thin, and it's got this faux leatherette, it's surprisingly thickly padded. Like, you can really feel it when you push in on the padding. That it's definitely there. So honestly, it's about as good as you can get for $60. I wouldn't pay $100 for it, but I think for $60, if you can get this at a street price, that's fair. Obviously, you're still sacrificing a couple things, like, for example, the cable. Oh man, just look at this thing. Like it's definitely about as cheap as it looks. Just a standard rubberized cable. The end is real small and doesn't have a screw-on adapter. They do include a 1/4-inch adapter in the box, though. I think it's gold-plated. I hope so. Most of them are. At least I think this is the adapter. You don't even know how many 1/4-inch adapters us reviewers end up having over time. It's too many is the answer. But anyway, it does come with that. And stock, it terminates as this 3.5 millimeter. Now, the cables are not removable also, which is, a downside, but, again, this is not a super expensive headphone or a professional application headphone. And interestingly, they also give you this adapter, not an adapter, they also give you this extension cable, which is 5 feet long. The stock cable is 3.9 feet. And so I guess if you need a longer extension, that's what this is, an extension cable. It's female to male 3.5 millimeter stereo. So that's what it comes with. That's the build quality. Moving on to comfort, I think these ear cups are just barely big enough, to be considered over-ear. I still think this is marketed as an over-ear headphone, but I don't think it's quite on-ear. it's there's enough room in here to fit your ear, but like just barely. I have larger than average ears, so if you have average ears or smaller ears, you'll probably be fine. But still, I don't think anyone with larger ears is going to want to wear this for more than maybe an hour at a time or so. It's not the most comfortable headphone in the world, but I feel like you get used to it. And unlike the M50X, this might be better than the M50X. It's been a while since I've tried that headphone, but it takes a lot of getting used to the Audio-Technica pads. They're fairly intrusive. So these are not great either, but they are soft. This is definitely some kind of memory foam. And thankfully they're deep enough too, so your ear doesn't usually touch the inside. At least mine don't. I don't know having that problem. But the circumference here is a little small, but it still works. So that's what I think about the comfort. Of course, these are pleather pads, so your ears might sweat in a hotter environment. They are closed headphones, so yeah, that can happen. But if you're not, if you have air conditioning, you'll probably be fine in the summer with these. All right, so let's talk about the sound and the bass in particular. First, so the bass on this headphone is definitely elevated, as you probably know by now, since it's been around for a long time. These do have an elevation in the bass. In particular, it's mid-bassy. There's definitely some kind of bloat around, I'd say 150 hertz. And you might not mind this. It does add a little bit of unnatural warmth to the bottom of electric guitars, maybe deeper notes of male vocals, and it's not quite right, but it's fun and it's relatively clean. I'd say relatively because it doesn't really stand up to very high volume. You're going to run into harmonic distortion territory with these for sure if you really start cranking them. But despite that, they do dig pretty deep into the sub bass, and that's really cool. For $60, that's super cool. Like I was impressed at how, if you're an EDM guy, this is pretty fun to listen to for sure. But just be aware that there's a mid bass hump here. For the mid range, there seems to be some kind of minor peak at around 3K, 3.5K, right around the ear resonance area. Now it's very small though. On some graphs you'll see it fairly large. I think if you Harman compensate the inner fidelity graphs, you'll come up with a peak around 5 dB, and that's a little exaggerated. Honestly, in my listening, I only lowered it by about 2 dB. So not too harsh, not too aggressive there. It is a little lazy, it's a little slow, it's a little bit grainy, but again, this is a $60 headphone and it's blowing away most of its, if not all of its competition with how it is already. And I just have to say that because I've listened to things like the LCD4 and I own an HD 800 and whatnot, so it's not going to be on the level of even maybe a $200 headphone, but for the price I don't think it's a big deal. But other than that, I don't think I had much of a problem with the mid-range timbre. The tonality there is spot on, just slightly forward in the upper mids. And so that brings us to the treble. I didn't have any issues with the low treble, around 6K sibilance region, that kind of thing. No problems there. But there is a bit of a prominent peak at 10K. And also the air above 10K sounds a little bit forced compared to some other headphones. At first, it sounds like they're actually more detailed than they really are. Because if you try to mess with the peak around 10K and comparing them directly to the AKG K553, for example, it's pretty clear that they're trying to throw some treble at you to sound like they have a more resolution than they really do. This is pretty common. But again, for me, for some EDM, bright mastered music, it might get a little bit strident, but it's not crazy. This is not a DT770. Don't worry about that. or God forbid, a DT990. So I don't think you're going to have much of an issue there. And if you do, you can EQ it down a little bit with, starting with my preset, maybe 3 to 5 dB around 10K. So that's what I think about the sound balance. And for soundstage, well, this is not going to win any awards. It's fairly small. I wouldn't get this for gaming. It's more of a music listening headphone. I found there's some ability to image between instruments, but it's a pretty small width. And it's really not so holographic like that instrument's right there. You can't really do that with a Aurvana Live. But again, $60 headphone here. So I'm not complaining too much. Isolation. Now here's something you have to know. This is a closed back, but it leaks a bit more than most closed backs. And this is something that you won't find mentioned much, I don't think. Like if you're reading Amazon reviews, which are probably useless for headphones anyway. But these don't isolate that well, and there is some leakage here. So I would only call them kind of a medium isolating headphone. I don't think they leak quite as much as the X00, but they definitely do still leak more than average. So you want to be careful with these. I wouldn't buy these to use in a library or a really quiet environment, but I think you can get away with it on, riding public transportation or something like that. That should be okay. After all, they are a portable headphone with a stock cable that's relatively short, but I would not use them in a really quiet environment because you're probably going to disturb people, especially if you start cranking it up. It's not good for that. You want IEMs for that anyway. So something to note. For genre pairing, I think this is a really good middle of the road headphone, even though I described it as having a little bit of mid bass, a little bit of upper mid boost, and some 10K mid treble boost. Generally speaking, it handles all genres quite well, and that's something that's very hard to find for something this cheap within the headphone realm. And so that's really the biggest takeaway here from this. It's quite a good headphone for the price, and I say that very often, but this is really a kind of a giant killer for its price range. And I can't think of a better headphone off the top of my head that I would recommend to people as a first over-ear. This is really seriously a superb headphone for under $100, let alone $60. I hope the street prices stay around that region because it's legit. And if you're just starting out in this hobby, I think that if your budget is high enough to afford this, don't even think twice. Just buy it. Just be aware of the isolation thing. But if you're going to be using this at home anyway, it should be okay. As long as someone's not trying to sleep next to you, unless you have your own room to listen in, you're going to be perfectly fine with this. But again, going back to genre pairing, the mid bassiness may bother some people. It's a little warm. It's a little bit strident in the treble if you're listening to something relatively poorly mastered and/or bright. But these peaks are small. These peaks are very minor for something so cheap, and that's the main thing about this headphone. It's just it manages to straddle all genres quite well, even without EQ. I have a good time listening to it. And also for amp needs, you don't need an amp for this thing at all. It's super easy to drive, so don't even worry about that. You don't have to go pairing it with even like an E10K will be overkill probably for this thing. You probably won't even need that. So to wrap it up, this is an amazingly cheap alternative with a somewhat similar sound to the X00 actually, which is interesting. They do measure very similarly when you overlay them on the Discord bot tool for Headphone Headquarters. It is so similar, but they're not quite the same. The X00 definitely has more resolution, better sub-bass extension, better comfort, better build quality. There's a lot of other stuff that you get for stepping up to $300 to $400 price range, of course, but I don't think there is a better starter headphone than the Aurvana Live. And I think this headphone may have faded a little bit from public view recently, so I'd like to bring it back into popularity land and say you really should hear one of these. This is pretty spectacular for the price bracket it's fitting in right now. And don't buy the second version of this because the frequency response is not as balanced and it's more expensive at the same time. So I'm not sure that's really going to be great. Maybe someone who's heard the second one can chime in because I haven't heard it. But from what I'm seeing and what everybody says, this is the one to get. And it's cheaper anyway, so you might as well. So again, this is probably the best headphone available to start out in this hobby if you can spend $60 on one. Aurvana Live. Thanks, guys. I'm glad that I'm back now. It's nice to be talking about headphones again, and I'll see you soon in a new review. Take care.